I've gone red. Right. As I say, good morning and welcome to this meeting of the National Park Authority, 10 o'clock on Friday, the 12th of April. We just go into the agenda. We start with apologies, but before we do that, exactly. Thank you, Janet. I'd like to welcome our new member, Secretary of State appointed member, Rachel Bennett, who is joining us following the resignation of Lydia Slack. And I think it wouldn't be inappropriate to say that DEFRA have acted quite quickly in reacting to the vacancy that we had and have appointed Rachel. Rachel works for Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and has previously been employed with the Eastern Moors Partnership, so is familiar with our landscapes, and we look forward to her participation in the business of the authority from now on. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much.
Okay, to the formal business then. The first agenda on the item is, first item on the agenda, it's going to be one of those days, I think, members. Apologies for absence. I received apologies from Mr Beresford, from Councillors Fryer, Huddleston, Heath and O'Leary, from Dr Swetnam and from Mr Thompson. Does anyone bring any further apologies? If not, we can move on to item 2, which is urgent business, and I've not been informed of any. So item 3, public participation, not been informed of any of that either. So we move hastily on to agenda item 4, which is members' declaration of interest. Do any members have any declarations they wish to make? Speak now or forever. Thank you. I shall take silence as no declarations of interest, which means we move into item 5, the first of the items for interest, which is the Peak District Nature Recovery Plan. Members will recall, I hope, those who were able to attend the last members' forum when the Nature Recovery Plan was introduced, and there was an opportunity for discussion about its content, its purpose, its application and so on. You've received the report with its link to the recovery plan. As you're aware, we no longer look to introductions from officers, so it's over to members really as to whether you have any questions on the covering report in the paperwork or the plan itself. So members, the floor is yours. Janet? Doug.
Yeah, thank you. Is my microphone on?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I thought this was fantastic. I thought it was really interesting and engaging, and I particularly liked how you'd brought together particular sort of habitat types with the people aspects. So thinking about the business economy, thinking about tourism and things like that. So I think looking for solutions that involve nature and people is the way to go. So I thought that was fabulous. I do, of course, have a couple of questions. One is, the main one is actually, do we have the resources with our partners to deliver this? And who are the partners? Is it the same as the management plan partners? And you say we're going to be getting a sort of annual review. Will there be targets attached to that?
Is it going to be Sarah or Sue that responds?
Sarah on the stakeholder bit. Thank you. The steering group that's been sort of instrumental in steering the content and the structure of the plan is made up of Forestry Commission, Environment Agency, Natural England, ourselves, Woodland Trust, National Farmers Union, National Trust, Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, Cheshire Wildlife Trust, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, Chatsworth Estate and farmer representatives. And we will look at whether that is the right steering group to go forward and whether the membership is right for delivery of the plan going forward. But the whole steering group is very keen to be involved in the next stages, so reporting and delivery of the plan.
Do they have the authority to be able to deliver against this?
Do they have the authority to deliver against this? I think a lot of this work is about working with farmers and land managers. Most of the national park is actually owned privately. However, this steering group has very purposely included some of the big landowners who therefore do have the influence over what they have in hand, and also they'll be looking at how they work with their tenants to go forward. Beyond that, all I'd say is that it just now is at the top of so many organisations and so many people's priority, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it will depend on the environmental land management schemes, that national funding that will seek to incentivise farmers to go down a certain route, and also this new future of how we blend that with the public and private finance, which is still not clear. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Does that answer your questions? Okay, thanks, Janet. Andrew Gregory.
Morning, everybody. I think my thoughts, well, first of all, agree with everything Janet said. This is a super piece of work. So comprehensive, so detailed. I suppose the thing that just I thought about when I was reading it is where the local authorities fit into all of this in terms of that. Because, going back to my time as a local councillor, I was very conscious of kind of trying to work to make certain that what Cheshire East was doing kind of was at least working with, or at least understanding what the Peak Park were doing. And I remember, talking to the member chamber about the National Park Plan and about how it was important for the local authorities to actually know and properly understand what's going on with the Peak Park. And I suppose just reading through the report, I was just kind of, is there enough synergy in terms of discussions, integration in terms of what they're doing in terms of local authorities? Because they've got their own plans, they've got their own nature recovery plans, they have their own conservation officers and the like. So I suppose my thoughts really are we going to make certain that the scarce resources that there are out there are going to be properly utilised, and there's not going to be kind of a doubling up or even some competition in some areas in terms of what people are doing?
Thank you. So we've been working really closely with the local authorities leading on the production of local nature recovery strategies across the Peak District. So that's 6 strategies that are currently in development. That involves the responsible body for that local nature recovery strategy, but also the constituent local authorities as well. So we've been going to those meetings, feeding in the nature recovery plan, and then working with the guidance that the local nature recovery strategy responsible authorities have to follow in terms of the production of those strategies, and making sure that the two work together and feed into each other. So the Peak District will be covered by 6 strategies produced on a county basis, but the nature recovery plan should be the place where they all come together and fit together and guide what those strategies are saying.
Thanks, Sarah. And it's not just officer level input, is it? I mean, Ginny has been representing the authority on a number of the groups developing their strategies, haven't you? Yeah. If you ahead of Andrew, if you don't mind, Andrew, Ginny, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yes, so far I've sat on the Derbyshire steering group. And my concern when I actually started this was that this was just going to be paying lip service to a big problem that we have as a nation. But I was very encouraged by 2 things. One, that there is an action to come out of this. It's not just a talking shop. And the other thing is that they recognise the value of working with the Peak Park because we are the people that are covering the whole of the area, and we have a specialist team that are working on this. So I think it's early days, but we need to keep some pressure on that this actually happens, and it's not just a great piece of work that is just put to one side. We've dealt with nature recovery. It's got to be action, feet on the ground, doing things.
Thanks, Jenny, for those comments. Andrew Hart.
Thank you, Chair. It's a comprehensive report. It's a good report. but it's also inclusive, and it brings things together, local authorities, the Peak Park, and I'm encouraged by the fact that it's got legs and it'll walk. Well and truly, we will achieve something from this. I've got a feeling, very much so. But it's also inclusive as well, so it's brought a lot of people together, which is very important, and that's how you get the people agreeing and working together properly. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Matt Buckler.
Yeah, it's a follow-up to the stuff around the local nature recovery strategies, really. So I sit on the steering group for the Derbyshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy, and the county council have, been really clear that the data that they have across the county as a whole has to be the same data. And so the work that David Alexander has been doing here in terms of land cover maps might be fantastic, but isn't going to be included in the Derbyshire data set because it's, they're not interested in it there being a different quality of data in the national park as outside. Have we looked at how much it would be for David to replicate, or I know it's not just David doing it. Have we looked how much it would be for that resource to be available to the 6 constituent local authorities? Because otherwise, we're going to have a local nature recovery. We're going to have this plan for the national park, which is based on one set of data, and stuff for all the local authorities, which is based on a completely different data set, and that isn't going to enable integration of them properly.
Thanks, Matt. Interesting point. Sue, are you going to?
Yeah. Really interesting question, Matt. No, we haven't yet. The next stage that we're looking at is actually using some of the, certain members will remember the report about the landscape recovery pilot bid, and the one that was successful, the Morridge Hill Country one, and an element of that is to help that project move forward in terms of a natural capital assessment. Now, Derbyshire have already done their natural capital assessment, but the next stage is to look at, and we're possibly doing with other areas as well, but the main one will be Morridge Hill Country because we've now got some funding to help deliver that, but also look at that transformation, or what the changes might be, and linking that to how you connect the habitats and some of the species movement. So I think we'll take that one forward. I don't know how much it would cost, but we could have a look at that.
Okay. Thanks, Sue. Patrick Brady, and then Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We had a very good presentation on this at the forum, and I looked forward to reading this report, which I sat down to yesterday afternoon. And I'm afraid I reached the conclusion that even dinosaurs had their role in nature recovery, and I was unable to read the report because of the format that it was in. So my first question is, it's sort of dotting around all over the place, and I couldn't concentrate on the subject matter because of having to bounce backwards and forwards. I'm not trained to read reports like that, and I found it very difficult. So I have some difficulty in saying I support it all because I really did not feel able to get to grips with it. There were one or two issues that I sort of did note, however, so if I could just pick those up. I was a little bit interested. I don't have a copy of the report here, but I think it's the very first paragraph. There's a sort of introduction where it says something like that nature will have to work with us. I can't remember the exact wording. And I did sort of wonder whether that was the right way round, and whether it wasn't actually us working with nature as an approach. Okay, that's the first point. My second point was a slightly detailed one. Somewhere in the middle of it, there was a sentence about dealing with endangered birds. And the line read something like, we will protect, or whatever it is, birds of prey and other endangered species. And I do wonder why we keep picking out birds of prey when some of the other species are equally as important. I mean, when I was a kid in this area, if you went out for a walk, there were 3 species that you came across readily. Actually, there was 4. There was a cuckoo as well. You never hear those now. but they were the skylark, the curlew, and the peewit. And those are easily as threatened as birds of prey, and they're, in historical sense, they're equally important in our environment. And yet the advent of modern farming practices, early silaging, early harrowing, late silaging, late harrowing, threatening them all. I mean, this year, the way the weather's been going, silaging is going to be earlier than ever. And the opportunity for some of these species to survive is very important. And I don't know why we just pick out birds of prey. It's a bit like saying, we'll look after the school bully, but not the child in the wheelchair. I mean, we really do need to get a sort of an evenness there. The third thing I couldn't quite pick up, and I'm not sure whether it's there or not, was about the relationship between tourism, or more accurately, the impact of tourism and nature and how we respond to it. I have in mind that when some fool decided to camp down in Miller's Dale for 6 weeks, we didn't see the dippers, which normally would have been around there. There are places now, I mean, the problem of visitors, I don't know whether anybody saw the photographs of what was going on at the top of Winnett's Pass over Easter, for example. It was horrendous what was going on. And I do wonder whether in this there is an ability to actually use whatever funds and abilities we have to try and direct tourists in a better way than they are now. If an area of land with a footpath 3 foot wide suddenly becomes an area of land about 40 foot wide, covered with mud, there must be a way of putting a footpath in and keeping the tourists on the beaten track. And I don't know whether there's that capital input, whether there's the emphasis on how we tackle the impact of human beings on all of this. It's not enough to have volunteers going around telling people things. We've actually got to do some physical things to make things better. And I don't know whether there's enough emphasis on that. But I'm not being obtuse when I say I will be abstaining on this because I really didn't understand the format of the report and it took me too long to get through it.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Those comments?
Incidentally, is there a possibility of a readable version to be sent to me that I could read from beginning to end like you would a normal report?
Well, let's get the responses to why the report is in its current format first, because I think the answer to that question is no.
Well, you see, that's the problem.
Go on, Sarah. Could you put your microphone off, please,
Oh, sorry.
Patrick? Thank you.
Thank you. The Nature Recovery Plan is in the same format as the National Park Management Plan, so an online-only plan mirroring the National Park Management Plan. And the reason that we've done it that way is partly so that it does reflect the National Park Management Plan, and also so that we can keep adding to, the case studies and make sure that the plan has the ability to evolve over time as we learn more about climate change and what is the appropriate response to try and recover nature. So that's why we did it that way. There will be a paper summary document, again, the same as the National Park Management Plan, available when we officially launch the Nature Recovery Plan.
Yeah, I mean, I was just...
Okay, you were on. Go on.
Well, I was just going to make an offer. If Patrick would like, then one of us can have a look at why you found it so difficult, because I'm surprised.
It's probably not you. I understand all the points, and this happens elsewhere. But if I may say so, with the management plan, we had a readable copy, which we then approved, and it was then translated into this format. But to sit down and try and... I mean, we're supposed to be being strategic here, and I have to say I found it very difficult to work through that plan distracted all the time by where do I look next and so on and so forth. When I learnt to read, I started at the beginning of the book and ended up at the end.
Ah, that was in the old days, Patrick. Do you want? Yeah, well, that's true. That's still old days to me.
Want me to take?
The birds of prey issue, perhaps?
Well, I'll just go even further back than that with the. I haven't got it in front of me, but
You keep putting your mic off for some reason.
thank you, both of you. The introductory paragraph, I think the reason, and Sarah will correct me if I'm wrong, because it's Sarah and Rodri who were involved in all the partner discussions, but I think that will have been very carefully crafted about nature working with us. However much we would like to say we work with nature, I'm afraid people aren't doing that in general, and therefore I think it is probably the right way to do it, and it is highlighting that. In terms of, it is birds of prey and other birds, so yes, we've had a particular birds of prey initiative, but we're constantly working with waders, and I don't think that the plan is as exclusive as just saying birds of prey. So all the species are important, especially those iconic ones. And I think the relationship with tourism, Phil, I don't know if you want to come in with that, with the sort of current area of search at the moment.
Patrick, your mic's on still. Thank you. Go on.
Yeah, Patrick raises good points about tourism and the impact of tourism. I think they are primarily being looked at elsewhere and through our work on, our emerging work on visitor pressure and tourism, through the Welcoming Place stream. So while all these issues do interrelate, and I do think we have to be mindful of the impacts of tourism when we're looking at nature, I think you'll see more of what we want to do about managing the impacts of tourism in other areas than this plan.
Okay. I hope that goes some way to answering your concerns, Patrick. I don't think it will fully, but...
When nature is being damaged by something, and you want to recover it, then I think the recovery process should be in the plan about recovery. But anyway, there we are. Let's see where things get to.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that we need to be mindful of is that this recovery plan is meant to be an iterative process, and there is going to be at least an annual review. And I think it's important that these comments are made, are registered, are recorded, and we can look for ways to incorporate them into future iterations. So it's not. I don't think in any way are any of the views being expressed going to be ignored. But it may well. It's a case, I think, that they can't be accommodated immediately, but will be in due course. Rachel Bennett.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask about the Protected Landscapes Outcomes Framework that was released about a month or so ago, and how that's going to be related in this plan. Thank you.
Sue, do you want to take that?
Again, really good
You've put
question.
your mic off again. Just stop it.
I need some training.
You
Like
certainly do.
Patrick and I need training, don't we? I think. It will. It's just too early days yet to have done that. And again, it's one of the reasons why we're seeing this as being very iterative and having to evolve. And ultimately, I'd see that we'll have that list of targets when we're clear on that, and then the delivery plan about how we're aiming and working to achieve that with partners and stakeholders.
Okay.
Do you want to add anything, Sarah?
In that case, Matt Buckler, a second bite at the cherry.
Yeah, sorry.
Quite all right.
The first one was going to. My first point was going to be about the point that Rachel just raised, and sort of looking at how regularly it's going to be reviewed and saying about its iterative nature. Obviously, there was the campaign for National Parks report about wilder national parks, which came out earlier this week, saying that 6% of land in the national park is being managed effectively for nature, and looking at those two things, what's the process for reviewing it and seeing how it's going to change, or is it going to be changing all the time?
You and Mike. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. So alongside the sort of the core nature recovery plan, there will be a delivery plan and a reporting template that we will report against all the aims, you know, sort of over the coming years, and assess progress. So for some of the aims, that will be easier than others. For some, we have data. For some, we might not. So that's why it'll be a very iterative process of you know, what we now need to do to achieve that step change for nature recovery. So that's the plan for the sort of the review. It also gives us a chance to, you know, sort of consider evolving delivery mechanisms like the evolution of environmental land management schemes and the integration of private finance, which is coming on board more and more.
Matt, you're coming back, I can tell.
No, I wasn't. I had actually had some other points as well, partly in response to Patrick's, if that's okay. So apparently for the UK economy, £16 billion comes from nature tourism every year, which is about 6% of the UK tourism total. So that's, you know, that's a significant opportunity that, that, you know, which we are probably not making the most of in the national park. And I would commend everybody to come and listen to what Chris has to say at the members forum afterwards, because the work that Moors for the Future are doing in terms of upland path restoration, or have done in terms of upland path restoration, and are still doing, I think, in terms of upland path restoration, is having a significant impact on the, you know, on the ecosystem services that the landscape is providing, and sort of manage, you know, so predominantly the sort of impacts of tourism is about management rather than reduction of numbers. You know, we can absolutely deal with large numbers of tourism, but large number of tourists and visitors, but there needs to be appropriate management of it.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for the advert for Members Forum and Chris's presentation. Janet Dugdale.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. First of all, I'd like to move the recommendations.
Thank you.
But secondly, the annual review. In terms of governance and members, where will we see that? Will that be coming through programmes and resources through the nature theme, or will it be coming to authority, or where?
Sue? Well done.
The hope is that we can link the major part of reporting on this with the National Park Management Plan. It's such a key part of it. We haven't done that yet. I can see that there'll also be a short summary with the annual update report that we do for PNR as well, the Landscape and Nature Recovery. But I'd see that as the short one, and hopefully, and if we can't get the two to work together, we'll have to do a larger report through PNR.
I think also we're at the start of the process, and the ambition to report and the ways in which that reporting might take place are nascent, I think would be fair. So I think we don't hold officers too tightly to the statements made now about reporting, but the will is there to ensure that members are properly and appropriately informed. Yeah, thank you. Andrew Hart.
I'd like to second the report.
Thank you, Andrew. If there are no further comments or questions, the recommendations, as on the screen, have been moved and seconded. Could I have a show of hands of all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Just the one. Thank you, Patrick. Okay, thank you, members. In which case, we can move on to the second, onto agenda item 6. A quick turnaround in staff. Thank you, Sue and Sarah. Welcome, Ben. Thank you. So the item 6 on the agenda then is the Capital Strategy 2024-25 to 27-28. Again, anticipation that members will have read this report, Ben Cookson, Finance Manager, is here to answer any questions or comments that members might have against the recommendations that, again, are on the screen. So, members, over to you. Any questions? Ginny Priestley.
Yes, I have actually asked Ben this by email. I just wondered why 2026 and 27 doesn't have any figures in it.
Good
Yeah,
question.
it's a good question, thank you. In the original, well, it's sort of a moving document. When I was speaking to property, there were some projects in there originally, but as we had discussions, we've moved them around. It was more sort of an oversight that we've seen that actually there isn't anything in 2026, but that's the current information that we have, that just that's how the budgets have been profiled. As I mentioned in the email, I think as capital projects progress, there is always what we call slippage. Capital programmes do slip into future years, but at the moment that's sort of the profile that we've put forward. So it's more coincidental than anything, that there's just a zero amount in that year.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Patrick Brady, and then Matt.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Looking at the recommendations particularly, recommendation 2 is to acknowledge the overall capital programme. I'm wondering what that means.
Yeah, so I've used that word because we're not approving the budget. We're not giving authority to spend. We're just acknowledging that this is the direction of travel for the capital programme. So just to acknowledge that those amounts are in there, and there will be business cases coming forward for those amounts.
Okay, so I think note would probably be a more accurate word, would it? Note. Note these.
Use the word note rather than in future.
Yeah. So I'm not being pedantic. I'm just trying to understand what we're being told. The second one is recommendation 4, which is that the capital strategy will be presented with a treasury management strategy. It seems to me that in an ideal world, the capital programme, we've got 3 things here, which slightly muddles me. We've got a capital programme, a capital budget, and we've got a capital strategy. And at the moment, they're a bit tied up with each other, and I think it could be simplified. But it seems to me that whilst putting a capital strategy alongside the treasury management strategy is perfectly okay, because that's about the background management arrangements. The capital programme or budget, depending upon which it is you're dealing with, really ought to be looked at alongside the revenue budget, so that we see the totality of our spending provision over the years ahead. Do you understand the point I'm making?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Patrick. Yeah. So the revenue budget, I think, was approved by authority
February or something
back
like
in
that.
February. Yeah, that's correct. And the work done leading up to that would have started in sort of November, December time, and that would have been the previous finance manager that did that. So the capital programme just wasn't done. So I only started in January, and this was one of the first projects that I had to bring forward.
So, so in future, the budget, or these wordings, the budget or the programme will be dealt with separately from the capital strategy. That's what we're trying to say, isn't it?
In an ideal world, and I think this is something that we are going to be working towards for next year, is your revenue budget and your capital budget would be presented together.
Yeah, but I'm making the point partly because when you get into page 22 of the report, that is the point at which we find out what some of this money is going to be spent on, but which we would not normally put in a capital strategy. You would normally put that, what it's going to be spent on, in the programme. But the programme is at the moment, actually the programme at the moment is little more than we are going to spend this amount of money next year. For it to be a proper programme, we would need to know what's going into it. We need to look at that, I think, in the future. Okay, I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Ben. It's off at the moment. Yeah, you're okay. Matt Buckler.
It was the question was about the climate change, because it says, you know, the report says that there are no implications to identify in this report, and sort of our capital strategy must have implications in terms of our climate change impact, where, you know, depending on what we invest in and what we're not investing in. And so, you know, because it would be good to see that if we, you know, as part of the capital strategy, we are looking at what impact we're having in terms of climate change.
Yeah, thanks for that point, Matt. I'm assuming that the business cases for the individual projects address issues like that, but I think it's a cogent point that Matt's making. So, do you want to respond to that at all?
Yes, I do think it's a good point, Matt. I think you are correct, Ken, in terms of just this report as an overall strategy. To include points on climate change for each individual project probably would be too large, and that would be addressed in individual reports and business cases.
But there may well be a case that some kind of overarching response to that issue, to climate change, could be incorporated in future, perhaps? If only to show not only are we willing, but the strategy is to do particular things, the programme is going to do particular things, and the budget is aligned in order to do particular things at a strategic level.
Yeah, at the very least, if we've got a climate change action strategy, which I assume that we do have, it would be good to see, you know, how that because there should be project. You know, I'm obviously not talking about putting in the project implications of this, but if we, you know, if we're saying that what we want to do, if we've got a climate change strategy, what's our capital strategy to invest in those climate change implications?
Janet, is that something that would be coming to P&R?
I don't know, but I would like to comment. I mean, Matt's right in incorporating climate change. Can I go back to when we started putting the climate change implications in the cover notes? The idea was to actually think through what are going to be the implications for climate change. And I think in this case, Matt's absolutely right. There may be implications depending on what we're using those capital programmes for. But that should come through in terms of procurement and the procurement requirements we have, and be monitored through the carbon management plan that gets reported to probably P&R every year. So that would come through there. But there's the agreement as to what we do. I think there are rules within procurement looking at how we're dealing with Scope 1 and Scope 2 that pick that up. But I also think, looking again at climate change, that we need to ensure that the capital strategy and the treasury management strategy are both considering climate change and our principles around where we're borrowing from and so on and so forth. That should be within those strategies as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So I don't, that doesn't directly answer your question, Ken, but I hope it provides some context.
Well, thank you, Janet. It's appreciated. Phil, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. Just having a quick flick through it now. If you look, I think your point, Matt, needs to be addressed in terms of the actual strategy document. And if you look at what our strategy is, the document covers our investment objectives, and it talks about 3.2 talks about climate resilience as one of our, so that would be in there. It then goes on in our risk management to talk about, you know, basically everything has to have environmental impact assessments, which will be incorporated into every project. So I think climate implications would come out there as well. And then we also have key principles, which include sustainable asset management. And again, I think climate will be addressed there. So I think within the strategy, climate implications and managing climate is picked up throughout the strategy. And then each individual project will have its own kind of climate assessment as well.
Can I respond? Which is terrific. It would be good if it said that in the report, because at the moment it says that there are no implications to identify in the report, and you know, at least collating that all of the things that we're doing, which says this is what we do, you know, this is how this is being considered, which means that next time it comes up, I won't ask the question again.
Is that a promise or a threat? No, thanks, Matt. I think it's an entirely appropriate point, and I think Janet's as well is also appropriate. That the purpose of that element about climate change in the report framework, the report template, is not just to note that the report itself has no implications, but the overarching subject, strategy, whatever it might be, is in there. And I take Phil's point, it's in the appendix, but at least it needs to be, the cross-referencing needs to be registered. Yeah, so I think it's not just for Ben, I think that's for anyone writing reports coming to the authority, or any of the authorities' committees need to, I think, be a little more thoughtful about those elements toward the end of the template and how they're responded to. Okay, any further comments, members? Andrew Gregory. I'm just happy to move the recommendation. Thank you, Andrew. Do we have Janet? Janet has seconded. Any other comments or questions, members? Martin Beer.
Just a question, really, in that the capital programme seems to be very front-loaded, in that there's considerable expenditure in the next year, and then in future years it drops off quite down to zero in one case. But so, does this mean that that's expected, that there is large-scale expenditure next year, but not in future years? Or is it a case that programmes have not been put forward?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that is the case, basically. You know, we attempt to project it into the future, but as we get further into the future, I think the projects that we're going to undertake are a bit more uncertain, or not at a point where we're going to put them into the strategy to present them. So there certainly are continuing capital works that will be done, but they're just not at a point to be put in there. But the capital strategy is always a moving document all the time. It will always update every year. And it's the ambition to ensure that we get more and more information into this as it develops through the years.
Okay.
That slightly worries me, in that we need, for things to go forward on time in the future years, we ought to at least be planning as to where potential money will come from, because we're going to have to apply for funding from other agencies and so on. That doesn't mean that we need to have them completely tied down. That's the programme. But the strategy should say, well, we're expecting to spend so much each year, and it will be on these sorts of things. And then say how we're going to look for the money to be able to fund them. Because income and expenditure need to be matched.
I really appreciate that point. I think it's a valid point. It's something that we should improve and work towards. So I'll certainly take that on board, and we will improve that moving forward, certainly.
But I think also I'd say that, as Ben has said, sometimes it can be a moving feast. I mean, the Part B item, for example, I think is incorporated into some of these figures, but it isn't. It has failed. So we have to, on the one hand, be as tight as we possibly can, but on the other hand, have to respond to opportunities that arise and things that fall by the wayside.
Exactly, but we need to know when an opportunity arises short term that we have the funding available, or we know where to get the funding from.
Absolutely, yeah. Point taken, I think. Thank you, Martin. Mike Chaplin. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just continuing from your point, Martin. We know that certainly government in recent years suddenly offers tranches of money, which means that local authorities, and I presume park authorities too, have to have, I hate this phrase, oven-ready projects, which they can then bid for and hopefully get the money. And I would have thought the Park Authority had a number of those, but you may not necessarily have included them in the strategy, but in a way they are parts of the strategy.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say shovel-ready, but that's my archaeological background, don't worry. But yeah, I think the DEFRA funding that enabled us to acquire an extension to the Worslow Moors estate is a case in point. When this equivalent came last year, that wasn't on the horizon. But there we are. We've just realised £500,000 to acquire that consolidation of our estate. So yeah, I mean, point taken. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, I think my understanding, Martin, and I'm looking at Hannah here just for clarification here, is that there's quite a significant backlog of work that needs doing, a lot of which we've got the money to do, and that's why you'll see quite a lot of the front loading here, is because there are a number of projects. Some of these projects take a couple of years to get to the point at which we can spend the money, and we've been working on them, and then we've had capacity issues and COVID affecting recruitment and retention and all of that. And we've got Hannah in now. We've got a team that's kind of got more capacity. And I think we are bringing forward a number of projects, as well as topical stuff, you know, the kind of the ash dieback work, which is quite topical at the moment that we need to front load and get on top of. So there are a number of factors like that, I think, that make it look front loaded, which is right, because that stuff needs doing. And I do think the stuff at the end stuff will come forward, the topical stuff, the one-offs, the stuff we don't know about yet, and so on, and stuff that we then find we've got more capacity to bring forward. So, as Ben says, it's a moving document. Each year it'll be updated. I think what you're seeing right now reflects what our urgent priorities are, what we've got the money to and capacity for, what we've got through to, you know, being oven ready, and we're now kind of about to put it into the oven.
Move away from some of these metaphors, I think. But okay, Matt Buckler for the final time, perhaps.
Yeah, sorry again. I get that, and that's right. But it's hard to do. I can see why that's part of the capital programme, and this probably goes back to what Patrick was saying earlier on. How's that a capital strategy? Because that's not, you know, that's not how. It might be that we can't be, you know, if you've not got plans for 5 years, that's not very strategic. You know, that's about how that's being responsive and thinking about, you know, what we're going to be doing in 3 years' time seems quite important if the money comes, you know, and I get that that's if the money comes through, but if you know, and so I think that they're almost two different things. That supporting the capital programme is great, but it doesn't seem very strategic.
Do you want to respond to that, either of you?
Yeah, I think I would, you know, respectfully disagree to some extent with that. I think the strategy is the document you've got there, which is the principles by which we make decisions. Then, you know, so that's your strategy, and then you've got to respond to topical stuff. You know, something breaks down, we need to throw some money at repairing it, which we might not have foreseen, or a new funding stream becomes available, which we can now go for. So I think this reflects both it reflects a strategic approach in that our principles are documented here, and then it reflects a reality of what work needs doing and what money's available and what capacity there is to deal with the stuff that's most important. And I don't think you can kind of operate an asset mix as big and complex as ours without having that element of kind of always responding, particularly to the external funding, which, as I think Mike said, you know, the way government have been giving funding out recently is very unstrategic. It's very short term. It's very restricted. You know, and what's great is we've got a team that can really jump on opportunities, you know, when they do arise. So yeah, not quite as strategic as we want, but that's a slightly higher up the food chain issue, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Patrick. Okay. Fine. If there are no further comments, then members, the recommendation has been moved and seconded. Can I have a show of hands in favour, please? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That's unanimous. In which case, we move, although the Part B item has been pulled, I think it's appropriate for us to go into Part B in order to have a little bit of explanation, a bit of background from our chief exec. So